Hi, everyone. God bless you. I hope all is well this Thursday. I want to just do a quick video in response and an act of solidarity with our dear sister Carolyn Medlock, who wrote this Power Pact. If you have not read this article, you need to read it. It's in the Spectrum magazine, titled "I Can't Breathe Either," and it was just published yesterday. This is, bar none, one of the clearest examples of some of the anecdotal experiences. I believe that once we get to a place where we actually start measuring the level of corruption and the lack of progress due to selfishness and personal political attainments from people in trying to achieve power, that it will just be one of the largest embarrassments the Seventh-day Adventist Church comes to bear with. I believe that this embarrassment is probably larger than the issue of race, than the issue of any women in ordination, you may name it. I think what we're seeing here in this article is something indicative of a century's worth, as she said, 100 years of just overreach, administrative overreach. Now, I've documented some of this in my own research and some of my own work with A.G. Daniels and his relation to the People's Church. Of course, you can read Douglas Morgan on this point. And I've kind of got into, I'm trying to split hairs on the articles itself and some of the specific documents. And it seems very clear that a long-standing tradition of interpreting the role of the capital church as one who is the arbiter of truth, the one who controls the message, who tells the constituents what should and should not be considered doctrine or theologically sound. And if we go through the processes by which we have ascribed to this doctrine or this nuance of theology, if anybody who's ever been a part of theological discussions can attest, it's not a pretty process, it's a messy process, and it's a dynamic and ever-changing process. And yet, when the calls for the greatest change happen, there are issues within our own manual and within our very structures that prohibit the formation of real organized efforts to reform our institutions. And I'd like to point just very quickly, I'd say really quickly, but please bear with me. I think you're going to find this really meaningful. I want to point to an aspect within our manual, and here you go. So if you see here, this is reasons for discipleship, reasons for discipline. You find this on in our recent manual, church manual. It's all online. You just type it up, you can find it. Page 62. We're going to look at point 10 and point 11. And I believe these 2 points are one of the ways that corrupt agents within enemies of Satan in our leadership, and I say this very clearly and very boldly, anybody who seeks to operate in the guise of sanctity or holiness for the sake of their own political gain and attainment, their own success, for financial success or personal success, are not working in accordance to the gospel. It's quite simple, quite clear. But these 2 points, point 10 and 11, are being used by these agents to counteract the gospel and to minimize and diminish the work that we're trying to do. And the reason why I'm coming here, both in solidarity to our dear sister who's reaching out and standing firm to the disorganization that she's seeing at the highest levels of governance, is to expose this thinking, this interpretation, how we actually look at it, how it's twisted, but also to hopefully give us a way into the problem to where we as constituents, as members, as activists, may stand firm despite the pressures that may come from unworthy leaders and stewards. Okay, point 10. Adherence to or taking part in a divisive or disloyal movement or organization. And point 11, persistent refusal to recognize properly constituted church authority or to submit to the order and discipline of the church. Now, these both are used in effect to disorganize local members, keep them uninformed, and when a member tries to cry out in protest or about abuse or about any abuse of power or abuse to the person, um, a lot of the issues can be shoved underneath the rug. Now, we've seen this over and over again. We have unworthy pastors that obtain positions of power, use that power to abuse a member in the church, whether it's a child. I mean, we have, if you read the manual, there's so many instances where we talk about child abuse. And the fact that you see something in a manual means that it's something happening, whether we promote it or not, or publicize it or not. Or they just have abuse of power in that they overuse their authority to do things that are not productive for the sake of mission or the movement of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, that is. And and then we also see the unequal way in which discipline is handed out. So for those who have established themselves politically in the church, either through their generational links or their just their how they position themselves with their factions and the people they align with, they are either reshuffled into the mix so they can go around and abuse further and continue to excel in the ranks of the church, or you have people who are completely innocent silenced completely, and so the victims are silenced. The people, I would say the heroes are silenced. The people who are willing to stand up for justice are shot down, and then those who are falsely accused are sometimes allowed to be fired, while those who are rightly accused are allowed to go free. So there's a big inconsistency, and we can go into the depths and the details of individual situations. But what I want to try to talk to is just the overall principle of this, a misaligning of the interpretation that allows for people in leadership to overstep their authority. Okay. So let's I want to look first at 58, page 58 here. Look here at authority of the church. So here, this is Testimonies, Volume 3, and I just want to highlight the last sentence here, this last section. I'll try to anyways. The word of God does not give license for one man to set up his judgment in opposition to the judgment of the church, neither is he allowed to urge his opinions against the opinions of the church. So you see here, see what you have to do if you want to hold on power in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, I'm just going to be very clear here, very, very transparent, is if you want to disband a group that's moving against you, you want to remain in administrative authority, you want to actually go through your whole time in administrative positions, and you don't want to lose your power, this is one way you can do it. You disinform. You see, as a conference leader, you're allowed to be able to go to all of your churches for instruction, and this is perfectly fine. This is what we need to be doing. We need faithful leaders and stewards to kind of guide local churches, so we do initiatives that attain the mission and objectives of the church. Perfectly acceptable. But you can also use this tactic to stop the communications that are going from the local church upward into the conference. And so you have a local church that has a grievance with a situation with a pastor, or a situation of abuse with an educator, or whatever it may be. You can receive the report and then you can silence it, so it isn't transmitted equally or is not made aware in a consistent fashion throughout the local churches. And the ability to control how the communication and how the story and the narrative comes forward allows you to align yourself and to create an aura of where you are higher than you really are. This allows you to create the voting block and delegations that you need. Another way you do this is that you hire pastors and you threaten the living daylights out them, so they're forced to be silent, where they can't speak unless they want to be fired. And if you're a young man, young woman, barely women, right? But if you're a young person just in debt because our institutions don't actually pay for you to go to school, they expect you to pay an arm and a leg. So you pay $20,000 plus for your seminary education. It's a good education, but an expensive one. And your promise of paying off that debt is only if you serve in the church for a certain amount of time. And so you are burdened with debt. You recognize that there's only a small percentage of people that actually get hired on as pastors, although there's a great shortage, but the funding is always never there. Anyways, we go into this situation where now we are beholden to the places that have hired us to do the work of God. And therefore, the threat is very real. And now this lowly pastor or this advanced pastor, who, whatever it may be, is now in a position in between two places of power, the local church and the conference. And they are, by the church manual's design, meant to balance with a conjunction and, I forgot the page number of that specifically, but you go look it up, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Um, they are supposed to align the will of the conference and also meet the needs of the local church. Now, how often do you think a conflict of interest will emerge with that kind of structure? So now you have the head of the board of the local church, which is supposed to be the voting authority that actually goes to the constituent meetings with their delegates to vote in this president. So do you think there's any chance that within this system of governance that there may be an attempt to corrupt the system? That there may be a way to compel a narrative to go forward that may put a person in power? Now, we could trust that the entire system is fair and just and true, and that only the most godly people, that God that keeps the people who are evil from obtaining the halls of power and governance, and only the saints go up. And it's just basically the general conference is just one seat below heaven, right? It's you just ascending the steps of enlightenment until you reach this, and that every judgment that comes down from heaven through our leaders is sanctified and should be blessed. And so therefore, any challenge to our godly, sanctified leaders, we're not the Catholic Church. This is not how we think. This is not our theology. This is not what we are doing. We are all in a priesthood of believers. We believe in the humanity of all, the gifts, the calling, your vocation, your sanctification, justification, glorification is a viable and potent thing, experience for every single member in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I'm belaboring this point for a reason. The authority given to our leaders is not designed for them to tell us or to give us unequivocal guidance that cannot be challenged. And there has to be a way and a mechanism to ensure accountability. Now, these two things I just talked about, the ability for a conference to place in agents who can facilitate their interests over that of the local church, and the ability to separate and segregate local church interests so that they are not aware of the overarching or the macro context of what's going on within the geographic area, within the field. This allows the conference an exuberant amount of power. Now, in a good situation, this amount of power can be very productive. We can see big movements. We've seen it in our past, and the Breath of Life formed out of these kind of structures. We've seen the regional churches formed out of these. Were very positive steps, right? We see really good things happen from this. But unfortunately, we've also seen a lot of bad things happen, and I would argue it's a big reason why we don't have the retention we have, especially with the young people who can easily go to a different institution, a different nonprofit or philanthropic company or group, with fully transparent missions and visions that actually reach and obtain their goals, that are actually doing what they say they're going to do with the donor's money, and they move forward. Here we are in one of the most sacred offices we can be as a servant of Jesus, working for the Lord, giving our tithes and offerings and our resources of time and everything we can to this work. And then we find the lack of accountability to the point that corrupt Ahabs and Jezebels are allowed to tell us how to corrupt ourselves. So let's go to the next page here. I speak candidly, again in solidarity here, because I think we need to be outraged. If you're not outraged by what you're hearing from my words, then maybe you have been in the system too long. Read this last right here. I encourage you to read volume 8 of the testimonies, this whole section. You'll even notice it afterwards. It has a section talking about the role of the laity in finishing the work. The importance of your lay members, of the lay ministry, is the key. This is the glue that keeps the church together. And the Adventist church actually doesn't function without the laity. No church does. But anyways, the church should discourage actions that threaten harmony among its members and should consistently encourage unity. Although all members have equal rights within the church, no individual member or group should start a movement or form an organization or seek to encourage a following for the attainment of any objective or for the teaching of any doctrine or message not in harmony with the fundamental religious objectives and teachings of the church. Capital C, lowercase c, very interesting. I'm not going to go into the details of the significance of capitalization. You should watch out for that. But I think it's important to recognize here that the council, the council that is interpreted here, that is outlined in the manual, does not give a license for leaders to, bar none, exclude calls of protest or calls for accountability from them. And it behooves us as members to recognize that we have the responsibility to call to account anyone who is not being transparent or obvious. Now, regardless of the reason why they are not transparent or obvious, they still have an obligation to be so. So as we look and we think about what's going on around us, and as we see the lack of responsibility and people using the guise of coronavirus to act as if we can't do governance, as if we can't actually do work. Now, the General Conference is maybe an excuse that we can do. I would also argue that we could easily form a delegation sufficient and safe enough in public to just pass the initial rule that would need for an online vote to take place. It would be a very simple thing to come together for one vote. And the amount of money that we're saving overall should not make this a problem. The fact that we've gone to now 2 years without a General Conference session is something that we should be concerned about. Anyways, neither here nor there, the halls of justice move slowly. We need to push back against any attempt to discipline people who are simply crying out for help, who are simply calling and challenging inappropriate behavior and abuse of power and an abuse of funds. Anybody who is attempting to turn this into a demonic attack or something like that need to be rejected in the name of Jesus. We have a right as members to know what's going on with our leadership. And we have a right as members to expect that the tithe dollars that we give to God goes to God's work. Simple. I think any leader or any pastor who's watching this or reading this or saying this, I think they have the responsibility, according to Ezekiel 18, if they have sin and they know that sin is existing, they have an obligation for their own souls to call it out. And so if you are a righteous worker, it is no longer acceptable that you stay in the shadows. And so we want to applaud the efforts here of our dear sister to make it very clear that there have been problems in the reporting and operation of the significant responsibilities of the executive committee. And I can only imagine that we have executive committees all over all over our divisions that are doing this. And we can be an example. And you can be an example. So I guess the question I just have is, and maybe this is my petition, my appeal to you who are workers, who are activists, who are pastors, who are administrators. What kind of church do you want? Do you want a top-down structure, or do you want a bottom-up structure? And you have to admit that the way we are doing this, the way that we structure this manual here, it allows for us to do some pretty shady things. And so what kind of checks and balances are we going to be willing to put in to make sure that our lay members actually have the power they really have? And how can we ensure that the leaders that come in, that are elected in, and that somehow abide in this position for 20 years, 10 years, 15 years? It's amazing how long people stay in these different offices. Some warranted, some not. How do we ensure that as you go along this process and as you become more jaded right? As you become a professional, you become more jaded in the task, and sometimes you become disenchanted with the work you're doing. How do we maintain the revival in these people and those who are seeking administration? How do we ensure that the members are heard? How do we ensure that the members can receive information so they can make conscious, good moral decisions? We can do more. Let us push. Let us not be afraid of organizing for the sake of bringing unity. True unity does not come from a coercion. It's a free will decision. And in the midst of free will, we have to recognize that there is the ability for people who once were faithful to become unfaithful, just as it is possible for those who are unfaithful to become faithful. So this isn't an attempt to really call out anybody specifically, except for the entire system itself. It's the fact that if we truly do pray and long for the transformation of the three angels' message and this great heralding message in this movement to go forward, and if we don't want to be a laughing stock because of the corruption within us, and if we don't want to have the internal disassembling and the disunity, right? Then the solution is very simple. We must stop being vague, unclear, wishy-washy in our deadlines and what we do. And we need to start actually doing what we say we're going to do. Minister, create real change, accept when we fail, and then move forward. Those are leaders we can get behind. And if you're not that leader, it's time for you to go. God bless you and keep you. Peace.